Good afternoon. Welcome to the Droidcon Italy warm-up. My name is Lucy James. I'm your host for today, and I'll also be your host next week when we are live at Droidcon Italy here in Turin. Ahead of that event, we thought it would be a good chance to get together to have a presentation from one of our Droidcon friends and to just have a little warm-up of all things Android ahead of the show next week. Joining me now is Marco Porcaro, who is our resident expert on Android. Marco, hi, how are you?
Hi, Lucy. I'm fine. Hi, everybody.
And how are you feeling about Droidcon next week? I mean, you've already done so much work, Marco. You've been part of the selection committee. You've helped put the agenda together. What are you looking forward to next week?
Well, it's always exciting, and of course, I'm a little bit nervous because this year we come back on stage, so real people, and not only live streaming. So for me, it will be something different because last 2 years I was on the stage, but in front of a camera and not in front of real people. But yeah, I'm super excited to this year edition.
It will be lovely, won't it, to have an audience and to be all together with the Android community, you know, not to enjoy not just seeing the audience when we present, but all those networking breaks and to see, you know, Droidcon friends, really.
Yeah, it's the best part of this kind of events. So having the chance to talk with real people, companies, and people passionate about Android in this case, it's the best part of the event. I mean, of course, the talks are super interesting, but it's all the environment that makes the event really great.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we're at a new venue for this year at Malto. So I think that's going to be exciting as well, somewhere new and fresh for us to do all of that networking and all those chats. But I wanted to ask you, I mentioned before about the committee. Now you're on the committee for Droidcon Italy. Tell us a little bit, what was it like this year, the selection process? Did you have an overwhelming number of applications? What was it like?
Yeah, it was really difficult to select only, I think, less than 40 talks because there were more than 200 submissions. So it was really hard to cherry pick all the best talks. With the committee, there is a voting process, so everyone can express their preferences, and after that there is there are some points given to each talk, and based on that we choose the agenda. But of course, the work doesn't finish after the voting part, because maybe there are two great talks, but the topic is the same. So in that case, we need to choose one of the two, and maybe contact the speaker to have some other kind of talks. So it's really a difficult editorial part.
Sure.
It's not only voting the talk. So it's not so easy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't sound easy, and I guess we're going to see the results of all of that labour in next week's agenda. So that's something for us to look forward to. And actually, this afternoon, at the end of the warm-up, at the end of this show, we're going to be making a big announcement about the agenda. So that's something to look forward to as well.
Okay.
Now, yes. Today we're going to have a presentation from Roberto, which is great because Roberto Orgiu is one of our speakers from many Droidcons. I'm very delighted to welcome his friendly face to the screen. Roberto, hi, how are you today?
Hey, hello everyone, I'm fine. What about you?
Tip top.
Hi, Roberto. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So nice to be here. Even if, I can't be at Droidcon in person this year, but at least we can do this, so it's fine.
These webinars and these online opportunities, it's not a bad way, is it, to stay in touch with the community, to be able to share, presentations, expertise. I think we've all found that in the last couple of years. There's a merit to this as well, so it's good.
Yeah, it definitely lets you reach many more people that probably could not just, be in person for all sorts of reasons. So it's amazing anyway.
Yeah. So thank you very much for being available for today's talk. For everybody that's watching, wherever you are, at home, at work, at play, Roberto's going to be giving us a presentation on large screen readiness. He will be taking questions after. So if you've got any questions, you can post them in the question bar on YouTube. So please do so, and he will look forward to your questions afterwards. Marco, I don't know if there's anything you want to get a quick preview from Roberto or check out before he goes live with his presentation.
Well, I can't wait to see the presentation because it's a really interesting topic and it's something new in the Android world because on the last version of Android there is more support for large screens, but I don't think that the community is using all the tools that Google developed for us. So can't wait to see what Roberto will present.
Brilliant. Well, look, Roberto, you have a great presentation, and we'll be back with you afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's get started. So, as the introduction said, we'll be talking about large screen readiness and especially why you should care. So, before we dive into what readiness means, we have to highlight the fact that we identified some levels of support for large screens. So, the first one, which we call tier 3, is what we identify as large screen ready. We see what that means in a while. The next one, a bit more advanced, is large screen optimized, where you have some experience that are optimized for large screens. That means, for instance, the amount of information you show, or how you organize your information or your navigation, many things that will change based on the size of the window in which your app is displaying. And last, and well, definitely not the least, is the first tier, which is large screen differentiated. That means that you have a totally different experience based not only on the amount of space that you have on your screen, but also on different hardware parts, let's say. For instance, you are on a foldable and you want to show a differentiated experience when you are on a call and your foldable is open in 90 degree, that will be large screen differentiated. But today we only focus on the first one, large screen ready. Okay, so what does I can speak today. What does ready mean in this case? Well, it's fairly easy, and it is that your user should be able to complete every task from A to Z in a totally unrelated way from the device they're using, or actually the amount of screen space they have. So it doesn't matter if it is a Chromebook or a tablet or a smartphone, your users should always be able to complete every task they want to complete with your app. This tier is based on 4 different pillars. The first one is configuration and continuity. Then we have multi-window and multi-resume, camera preview and media projection. And last but not least, I love saying these, it's basically different input types like keyboard, mouse, or trackpad or stylus. Let's tackle the first one right away, which is also one of the most common, which is surviving configuration changes. But first, let's identify some of the configuration changes that can happen in your app. So, of course, we all know about orientation change. We have our device, we rotate, a configuration change happens. No big deal. Next one is the theme, like the automatic switch from light mode to dark mode that will trigger a configuration change. Another configuration change, which is pretty peculiar, it's actually the keyboard. So the fact that your software keyboard appears or disappears, or even if you plug or unplug another keyboard. And another one that I want to mention is resizing your window. So imagine you have a freeform window or a window that is running in multi-window mode and you start resizing. That's when configuration changes happen. Okay, so we highlighted some of the configuration changes. We need to see what actually can happen. What are the different situations in which you can find yourself? So the first one is the loss of state or scroll position. What does it mean? Well, it means that imagine that you have a list of items and your user scrolls all the way to the thousands of these elements. Then a configuration change happens and your user actually is brought back to the top. While this can be a feature, it might also be annoying. So one solution would be to leverage the onSave instance state to store the scroll position or whatever your state is. And by state, we mean the amount of information that your app is using at the specific moment to continue with this flow. The next one is something that happened to me a lot in the past, which is the fact that one of my view could lose their content. In that case, usually I would have forgotten the view ID. That would be enough to actually lose everything. Last but not least, and that's something that still happened a lot of time, is the fact that I was probably running a long operation like a network request or parsing or anything, and with the configuration change, this operation stopped. Probably because I forgot to put that in a view model or in any component that would actually survive the configuration change. View model is the safest and easiest way. But there is a caveat, and there is the fact that we can leverage something else also for the state and the scroll position, because actually the view model could help us quite a lot. So if you're not familiar with the view model, I suggest that you take a look into it because it's really important and helps us in many, many ways. Now, let's switch gear to multi-window. So, multi-window, yeah. Why is this important? Well, it's important because multi-window is actually everywhere for every app, especially from the latest versions of Android. But before we dive more into this concept, let's take a step back and see the evolution of multi-window from a few versions of Android before. So on Android 7, we had the split screen on on some selected handhelds, and we have picture-in-picture for some video playback. With Android 8, we had picture-in-picture for all the handheld devices. And with Android 12L, every app now can be in multi-window, especially, well, on large screen. So anything that is considered a large screen and is running Android 12L can actually put every app in multi-window mode. One thing to mention is that from Android 12, OEMs can override the screen orientation and force landscape on apps. So basically from Android 12, we really want to support all the configuration changes that we saw so far, especially orientation. From Android 13, we actually expanded multi-window to be everywhere. Okay, now that we have an overview of what happened on Android until now, let's see how we can deal with that. So, before API 13, we could decide that our activity will not be able to run in multi-window mode by setting the resizable activity flag to false. Great. But if we set that to true, that means that the activity could be launched in both split screen and freeform modes. So imagine something like DeX mode on a Samsung device. What happens if we set it to false and the user try to launch the activity in multi-window mode? Well, with that flag set to false, the activity will simply take over the whole screen. So actually, that will work exactly how we would expect. Things will change a little bit from API 31 and newer, especially when we have a bigger width. So with anything that is bigger than 600 dp, all apps can run in multi-window mode. This attribute indicates whether the activity can be resized, of course. But if we put the resizable activity flag to false, that means that our app will run in compatibility mode, so that it could actually fill the screen with some letterboxing black or colored bands based on the OEM. So imagine your app and on the side, some sort of padding to make it fill the screen. On smaller screens, if the resizable activity is set to true and the activity actually had enough space to meet the multi-window requirement, the activity will support multi-window mode without any problem. Otherwise, if we set the resizable activity to false and we are on a smaller screen, well, we are not supporting multi-window mode. So basically, it really depends on where we're running. One thing to mention is that we are based on a DP, a very specific DP value, which is 600. And that means that it's not only tablets. It can be also last generation smartphones. Imagine a top tier smartphone on landscape will probably have more than 600 dp. So will most often than not happen to be in the resized or letterboxed challenge rather than on the other one. So another change when talking about multi-window is the idea of multi-resume. So before Android 9, only the last activity that the user interacted with was in the resumed state, while all other visible activities would be in the started phase. What that means? Well, it means that if you have a video playback app, you don't really want to start and pause your video on resume and pause. Otherwise, when you are on multi-window and you're not the focused app, well, your movie will simply pause. You would actually prefer to run your video and stop it in the start and stop method. Something that changed from Android 10 is the fact that all the activities will remain in the resumed mode, regardless of focus. We introduced another concept to understand which is the activity that the user interacted with at last, which is the topmost activity. So, from Android 9, before Android 9, only the last activity the user interacted with is resumed. With Android 10, every activity that is visible is resumed, but only one will have the topmost flag. Why this change? Well, this change because we have a new method that we can override in the activity, which is on top resumed activity change. This will tell us if our activity is the last one that the user interacted with. This is especially important for accessing exclusive resources like camera. So one thing to mention is that if you're not the top resumed app, you probably want to free the camera for somebody else and reacquire it if you are the top resumed one. Something to mention is the fact that using resizable activity to false to basically avoid multi-window is not a guarantee of exclusive camera access, because other apps could use the camera and they can be open on other screens or on other displays. Or, I don't know, the camera stopped working on anything. But you cannot use the resizable activity as a guarantee. That's the important part. And to know if you can actually get the camera, there is a new callback called availability callback that will tell you exactly what are your priorities related to the camera. So if you merge the top resumed activity changed and the availability callback, you'll be able to know exactly when to get and remove your camera access. Another important thing is knowing if you're running in multi-window mode. And for that, there is a specific method, which is in multi-window mode. This will tell you if your activity is running in multi-window mode, if you need to know it for any specific reason. Now, let's switch to the camera. There are some things to keep in mind. First, the camera can change. Imagine, again, a foldable device. You are taking a call while the device is folded, so you're using the front camera. Then you decide to unfold your device and the camera will actually switch to the internal one. Theoretically, this is managed by the OEM, so the idea would always be the first one, because they will disable the external camera and enable the internal one. But you should never cache the ID of the camera you're using, but always query for the new one, because you never know when this can happen. Another thing is that your app can be resized while the camera is showing the preview. So it means that you have to adjust the surface so that you can actually respond to this resizing event. Orientation can change during preview. And another display can be added, so you probably have more space to show your preview. Or you need to show it somewhere else. Well, if you use Camera X, you actually don't need to take care of anything, because Camera X is continuously tested on multiple devices and form factor exactly for this reason. But if you want to have a deeper dive on how these actually work on Camera 2, we have a code lab that you can follow and basically will guide you to solve all the aspects that we just highlighted. Continuing to media projection, well, there is something to mention. Media projection will capture the entire display, regardless of the app size. So there are few things that we can do to actually make it right. The first thing is making our app resizable and supporting both the orientation. And last but not least, leveraging the window manager to get the bounds of the media projection. So basically what you will do, well, you simply say, window manager, please give me the bounds, and then you use that to actually use the media projection API. Okay, now for my favorite part, keyboard navigation. And this is especially important because there are many devices that actually have a keyboard. Imagine all the new tablets that are being released, especially the top tiers one, they all ship with a keyboard, or there are Chromebooks. Lots of Chromebooks don't have a touch screen, so keyboard navigation is even more important. And last but not least, there is like some desktop mode, which will allow you to connect your phone to the computer and use your mouse and keyboard without a touchscreen, probably. So this is very, 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 very important. So, of course, keyboard navigation is something that interacts quite a lot with your view system, be it views or Jetpack Compose. We see them both. So let's start with views. What you need to do when you are working with views is adding the next focus forward and the ID of the next view that you want to go through when you press tab. But this is not the only action that you can take, because you can navigate up, down, left, or right by adding the specific tags in the XML. This is important because, well, your users might want to actually navigate with their keyboard and with the tab. So it's important that you study your navigation properly. Also, something that is important is responding to keyboard events. For instance, you're playing a video, I expect to press the spacebar and pause it and press it again and, well, start it again. How you do that? Well, we have two methods in the activities and in the views. They are on key up and on key down. They can both be overwritten. The difference is that on key up is called only once when the user lifts their finger from the button. On key down, on the other hand, actually will send multiple events if the user presses and holds the button. There is also the possibility to check if the user is holding a key with a modifier. While you can always check the code of what you receive, there are some helper methods like is shift pressed or is control pressed that will tell you if the user is also holding down these auxiliary buttons. Last but not least, I really love this, with views is actually responding to mouse over. So your user moves the mouse, goes on top of a view, and you want it to highlight subtly your view to actually communicate the fact that you can interact with that view. You can do that by adding the on-over listener that will actually tell you when the hover starts and when the hover ends. Now, let's switch to Compose. Okay, to navigate with Compose, we have two modifiers, the focus requester and the focus properties. By specifying these two modifiers, you'll be able to enable tab navigation and help your users navigate your composables. I find particularly interesting the next one, how to respond to keyboard event. We have two different event modifiers that we can use, on preview key event and on key event. They have a very subtle difference because, well, let's take a step back. So first, you want to return true to your modifier when you consume the event, or false otherwise. How these two modifiers actually differ? Well, one will actually go back, well, go all the way up from the children to the root, and the other one will go the other way around. So it's really important that you use the right one. And in this case, if none of the children actually can respond and consume this key event, it will be sent back up to the root key input modifier, and it will be managed automatically. For what concerns mouse over, the simplest solution would be to add a clickable modifier. In this way, the hover will be added automatically, but there is also another way if you don't want to make your composable clickable, which is adding an hoverable modifier and adding an indication so that you only have the hover without the fact that actually you can click. Okay, so we gather all the links and all the guidance that we talked about in this talk at this URL, so go.gle/large screen links. All the links will be there. They are already there now. So feel free to check them and prepare for a large screen. And I guess that's now time for questions. Thank you very much.
Sorry, guys. Listening and talking to my colleague, and there we are. Thank you so much, Roberto. Thank you.
Thanks,
so I think,
Roberto.
Marco, you're going to take us through the questions that we've got here, and I'll leave you guys to have a chat about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto, for your talk. I have some questions for you. In particular, I want to focus on the layout part because we saw that there are a lot of different cases with larger screens, foldable screens, resizable activity, and so our activity can change during the execution of our application. So is there something in particular that you suggest to take care when we are designing the application and when we are creating our layout in XML or Compose to be sure that when our activity is resized, everything keeps working fine?
Yeah, well, first thing, test always. That's the most important part. Well, it really depends where you are with your large screen support when you start. Because if you start from scratch, is easier, let's say, to actually have designs that work for all the different sizes. So we identified 3 buckets that are like the compact bucket, the medium bucket, and the expanded bucket that would, let's say, help you understand how much space you have on the screen so you can easily make 3 different layouts based on the width or the height, and they will be applied automatically. The same goes with Compose, and this technology is called window size classes. By leveraging them, you can always know how much space you have, and you can react accordingly. For instance, one thing that happens with a lot of chatting apps already now, like take Telegram for instance, or Gmail. If you run them on a bigger screen, on a larger display or whatever, you have more space. You can see most of these chatting apps being on two columns. So you have your list of chats, and then on the other side, the detail of chats. This could be a very good adaptation of your layout. If you're on a smartphone, well, you have the list of your chat, you tap, and you open the chat itself. Then you go back and forth. So this could be something that you can adapt when you're designing for large screens.
Okay, thanks. And what happens when using a foldable device, we open the screen? I mean, there are a lot of different foldable devices. Some opens in front, some from the back. So in some cases, we have two different screens. In other cases, we have one screen that becomes bigger. Would take care of what happens during the transition. I mean, if my app is small and then becomes bigger, is there some animation that it's automatically done by the OS, or is something that me as developer I need to take care?
No, as of today, well, I would split this question in two. So for what concerns the animation, as of now, I don't think there is anything possible because you have your screen like that. I have to place in front of the webcam, completely different. Okay, so you see the content here, and then you open, but you cannot really see the animation itself because you are changing displays. So in that case, the system will take care of drawing your activity, and your responsibility will be to actually restore your state. So it's a shared responsibility.
Okay.
And I think that's independent from the amount, from how the foldable unfolds and how many screens there are in this specific case.
Okay. And I think that I have just one more question for you. What do you think that is the hardest part when we need to take care of all these kind of different screen sizes? Is there something that for you it's hard, or I mean the hardest part?
Probably historically, I would say orientation,
Okay.
because that's something that is often overlooked. Because, well, until now, we can say we were used to use our smartphones. They are basically taller than they are wide. So we usually, hold them in portrait. And even when we use split screen, I tend to use it a little bit of my on my phone. You still always have like a portrait-like experience. So probably that's the most complicated part for me. I have to say that with the introduction of view model, it's been easier and easier. But that probably for me, like historically, is the hardest part.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Roberto. Let me check if there is some other question. No, so I think that we're
I
done.
have a question actually, which leads a bit on from your question, Marco, because if I remember correctly, when I first met you, Roberto, you were working on wearables, and so like much smaller screens in reality. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what's that journey been like? And like, have you got a preference for for the output for what you're working on?
Well, I have to say that I've grown interested in large screen in the past few years. Well, mostly because I think that there is an opportunity there to actually unlock different experiences. I remember when I was working on another project, we had this idea of running the home screen as a newspaper, like a newspaper made of paper. So, with the different pieces of different height, different width, and that's something that you can only get on larger displays. So it's something that intrigued me. At the same time, I think that there is a lot that we can still do with wearables. So there is a lot to explore, just not enough time.
Someone's just made a comment that one of the challenges is convincing your company to get the budget to buy the devices to do the testing on. I'm imagining that you've got like a stockpile of different size devices somewhere at home. Is that right?
Well, actually, I was suggesting to use the resizable emulator, which works pretty well. So you can really resize and see everything from a smartphone to a foldable to a tablet to a computer. So that would help a lot.
Yeah. There you go. So there's a top tip for saving budget on testing in the office. There you go.
You see? Also tip.
Marco, do you want to do a last check if there's any other questions there?
No other questions right now. But
So,
I agree that it's the hardest part is to have the budget to try all the different devices. So we need to work a lot with the emulator. But that in the last year, fortunately, it's really improved a lot.
I'm glad to hear that.
Well, look, thank you again for the presentation, Roberto. We always appreciate having you involved in Droidcon in whichever way we can make work for us. I think since we're live and also being recorded, I'm going to take this opportunity to say you will be there next year for the 10th year of Droidcon Italy, won't you?
I hope so. I mean, I will do my best. But thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. If you guys have got a couple more minutes to stick around, I'm going to do our big announcement for this year's Droidcon Italy agenda. Yeah? Cool. All right, so let's do a drum roll. Okay, because we are going to announce the second keynote to join us at this year's Droidcon Italy. So as we know, the event takes place next week, 6th and 7th of October, here in Turin and live online. And our second keynote is Julien Salvi. He's with Aircool, and he will be doing a 10 years retrospective of Android development. So taking us all the way through all the history right up to present day, how Android has changed, how he's going to fit that into a presentation and not a 30-week presentation. I have got no idea, but you've got to be at Droidcon Italy to find out. Guys, what do you think? What would your highlights be of 10 years of Android?
That's a question I should have prepared for.
Oh. Shall I ask you next week?
Yes, so I have time to prepare.
All right, no worries, no worries.
Well, I think that it would be great to see what we went through during the last 10 years, because the Android development world in 10 years changed really a lot. It's something different. Developing an app right now, it's really a totally different experience than developing an app 10 years ago. So I think that it will be a nice journey to see all these changes from a user perspective and from a developer perspective. So
yeah. It's going to be a really good opening to day 2, isn't it? Like, it's such a good scene setter for that second day of the conference.
Yeah, I think that it's a great choice.
Yeah.
I don't know who made it, but it's really a great choice.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, again, thank you so much for your time, both of you, today. We really appreciate having you here for the warm-up. Roberto, thank you for your fresh presentation. Marco, as always, fist bump, great to have your input. We will see each other next week. And Roberto, I hope to see you next week if you can swing by for a coffee and a chat.
Sure. Thanks again.
All right.
Thank you, Roberto. And see you next week in Droidcon.
Exactly right. So next week we will all be here. We will be in person, in presence, live, in Turin at Mauto, the Museo dell'Automobile, here in Turin, and also live online. Tickets are still available for both of those shows. If you want to join us in Turin or if you want to join us online, the tickets are still available. We would love to see you here. We have got 2 days of great presentations and a wicked exhibition as well. Look forward to seeing you in Turin. And for now, enjoy the warm-up. If you want to rewind